Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I'm extremely happy to welcome you here because today we're going to tell a story. The story of the Brno meeting. This story is extremely new and fresh. This is something that has just begun. And I think that is also quite peculiar, but at the same time extremely meaningful. And I am surrounded by the protagonists of the story, and I'm going to introduce you to them in a second. But before that, I would simply like to say a few words about the way I got in touch with the story. So I would like to tell you how I just happened to know it. First of all, one friend here comes from Germany, our friend Posselt. The other three come from Brno, Czech Republic. This year, from the 23rd to the 30th of May, something extremely similar to our meeting happened. It is something extremely close to us because this is a big event made of workshops, conferences, shows, exhibitions. It is so similar and close that the organizers themselves wrote in Czech, but also in English, thank God, so we were able to read it, that they were inspired by our meeting in Rimini. The title of their meeting was Lost and Found Homes, but in a second we're going to understand much better what was it all about. And we got intrigued by this Brno meeting, and we tried to get a better understanding about that kind of event. And we found out that the whole city was involved. The mayor and the city administration not only supported, but were co-organizers of the initiative, so the involvement was official. And there is a large delegation here of the Brno meeting, not just these friends surrounding me, but also other people. And I think that they are here thanks to an official decision that was made by the city council. So we found out that the whole city was involved. Secondly, we found out that there were also a very poetic content inside this meeting because Kateřina, a very important and meaningful author that is here with us, was also involved. But upstream, there was even something more. There was something called the Pilgrimage of Reconciliation. What is it exactly? Well, this pilgrimage was made in 2015 to commemorate almost 8,000 victims of German origin that in 1945 were forced to leave Brno. They were expelled, and the vast majority of them did not survive the harshness of that death march. And our friend Posselt is going to tell you more about the historic details of this story. First of all, we know now that there was this Pilgrimage of Reconciliation in 2015 to commemorate these 8,000 victims of German origin of 1945. So the idea was to express public grief and apology. That's what the authorities wanted. And so there was this pilgrimage. It was made from this mass grave located at the border with Austria, where many of those 8,000 victims were buried. And to think to what extent that act was meaningful, because they went down the same route but in the opposite direction. So in 1945, the people had to march from Brno towards the Austrian border, and this pilgrimage was made the other way around in the opposite direction, but with a clear intent to express something really different, so to oppose the hatred and revenge sense were contrasted by these desire of hope and friendship. At the end of that pilgrimage, it was made together with many German citizens. The mayor read an official document written by the city council, and the bishop prayed for reconciliation. After that, something else happened, and so the consequence was the Brno meeting that solved the day. And so now our friends are going to tell us more, and every one of them is going to tell us a little piece of this wonderful big story to get a better understanding of this event, how it started, and what is it about, and what's happening right now. The very first speech is by Bernd Posselt, to my left. Bernd Posselt is a politician and a journalist. He's German. He's the spokesperson of the German from the Sudetenland, and he was a European MP between 1994 and 2014. He was also the president of the Pan-European Union in Germany, and we asked him specifically to tell us more about the historic background, so to trace back the causes and roots of that expulsion, of that death march, also to get a better understanding of the extent of hatred that generated that tragic event. So to understand to what extent the tensions between the Czech people and the German people have grown, because until that moment in time they have cohabited together on the same territory in peace. Thank you very much. The floor is yours.
Madam President, dear colleagues, first of all, I would like to say to you that I am grateful for the invitation to this famous meeting in Rimini. I have a lot of Italian friends who were active here, and I'm deeply impressed by what you are doing. Now to the point.
You can speak.
Yeah. It is 100 years ago that we all here on the podium, not you, but we others, were citizens, or our forefathers were citizens of the same country. We were citizens of the Austrian Empire, or our forefathers. We were citizens of the Kingdom of Bohemia and Moravia and Silesia. And we were it for decades. We were it for centuries. The first Posselt is documented in the 12th century in Brno, and he was Rudolphus Possoldi Filius, so he wasn't the first one. And he was German-speaking. 2/3 of the inhabitants of our region were Czech-speaking, and 1/3 was German-speaking. And nearly all German-speaking citizens had some Czech forefathers, and nearly all Czech forefathers in the region had German forefathers. So it was a mixed region, and it was a common culture, and it was a very good relation among the, I wouldn't say nations, I would say speaking groups or language groups. Same culture but different languages. And this was destroyed in the 19th century by nationalism. And then we had a lot of problems. Nationalism on both sides, then the Nazi crimes, before the World War and during the Second World War from the German side, and our minority was misused by the Nazis as fifth column, and many went with the Nazis and took part of the crimes. This is true, but not all of them and not the majority of them. After the war, there came the crimes of expulsion. 3 million German-speaking people were expelled from the Czech lands, if they were guilty or not. Children, old people were expelled. German-speaking Jews were expelled. They came from the concentration camps back, and then they were expelled because they were German-speaking. This was the idea of collective guilt to kick them out. About 3 million were kicked out. Then came the crimes of communism, and the communists used the feelings of the Czechs to make them anti-German and anti-Sudeten German, because they wanted to have the Iron Curtain and the hate among the peoples. And so there was a lot of bitterness on both sides, artificial, supported by the communists, because they used it for their force in the heart of Europe, to destroy the heart of Europe, to divide the heart of Europe. Thanks God, we had, after the Second World War, in the free world, first chances of reconciliation. For example, my parents said very clear to us children, nationalism, also the nationalism of our families, has destroyed our families and our homeland. And your generation must do what is possible to build up a free Europe. And we started with this as very young people, and many of us did it supported by old people who learned from the history. But behind the Iron Curtain, it was not possible to have such activities. But we cooperated with the underground. First visit in Czech Republic as speaker was in 1988. I was there to speak at the Forbidden Underground University, which was founded by civil rights fighters, by the opposition against communists. It was illegal, but it was done, and I had the chance to speak with them. And so we had discreet contacts, but not official. And after the fall of the Iron Curtain, we had the chance to have a new beginning. First of all, there was an euphoria, very positive feeling on both sides, but then both sides were not prepared enough. There was an enormous disappointment, and it was used by nationalistic politicians to create tensions between Czechs and Germans, Czechs and Sudeten Germans. And we had these problems till 2-3 years ago. Here are friends in the room, Czech friends. I'm working with them since 25 years. They did a lot in this time, but some people on the top of the politics, especially also some leading politicians in Czech Republic, were in this nationalist thinking. But in some cities, people started from the base against nationalism. They came from the base and they forced politicians to be more open for reconciliation. Most of them were Christians like we. Some were Jews. But it's interesting, a huge majority were believers. Believers on both sides who did what they could for reconciliation. And 2 years ago, and the colleagues will tell you about it, the city of Brno started, after a long preparation by young people, an initiative which is fantastic. They gave an answer to the so-called Brno Death March, which was 70 years ago, 71 years ago, a march of thousands of German citizens in Brno to Austria, where many were killed and many died on the streets and so on. This was a horror after the Second World War, not during the war. It was not a war crime. It was after the war. It was a post-war crime. And they did what they could to think about this march, and they protested against this so-called death march 70 years ago from Czech Brno to Austria, with a march from Austria to Brno, together Czechs and Germans, Czechs and Sudeten Germans. And this march was a march of life, protesting against the march of death. It was a Christian pilgrimage. And what is fantastic, I had the chance as the leading representative of the 3 million Sudeten Germans to receive this march in the city of Brno, together with the Lord Mayor and with the Bishop. They came, about 1,000, mostly young people, but among these people on the place, there were 25 survivors of the death march 71 years ago. This was extremely impressive. And since this time last year, we have regular meetings in May remembering this horror of nationalism and to work together for a Christian-based Europe. Thank you very much.
During the tragic march of expulsion, there were many women, children, elderly people. Among them, there was Goethe. Goethe was a young German woman with her child, with her daughter. And Goethe is the key character of one of the novels, maybe the most successful novel, because it is connected to these events, by Kateřina Tučková, to my right, whom we welcome with a big round of applause. Kateřina is one of the most successful writers, in recent years. She wrote many novels. This one, Goethe's Expulsion, is connected to this event, so much so that Kateřina's novel dates back to 2009, and Kateřina is so much involved in this event and in the tragic event of the expulsion from Brno, that Kateřina, together with others, let's say, was the sparkle, launched the idea of this Mythen Brno. So I want to ask now Kateřina to tell us this story, to tell us her story. Why did you tell this? Why this novel? Tell us something about Goethe. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. And at the beginning, thank you very much for invitation and the opportunity to share my experience with you. I brought up to you my personal point of view, and I wrote it down. If you don't mind, I will read it, because I wrote the whole book about Czech-German issues, which is quite thick, and I don't want to bother you with all and everything what is inside. So I will tell you the Goethe's story and my personal story, how I came to this topic. So my point of view is a view of a woman who was born into the country with a totalitarian government. but was fortunate to have spent most of her life after the Velvet Revolution, which means in a free and democratic state. With both these experiences, and perhaps more thanks to my work in which I often speak with old people and personal witnesses, I have the possibility to compare the attitudes towards Czech-German issues across generations. As a high school graduate in the 90s, I knew little of how Czech-German relationships had remained fragile since the end of the Second World War. I knew little of how many aversions had still persisted. The official education in schools was concentrated on the bare facts about World War II and emphasized the suffering of the Czech people and the merit of the Soviets for liberation. Talked about, but not focused on by teachers, was suffering of Jews and the Holocaust, while nobody mentioned the other ethnic group that had almost been exterminated by us, the Roma people. The existence of German anti-fascist or even violence against German-speaking civilians was not discussed at all. Educators taught their students the history according to the patterns that they had acquired during the time of communist dictatorship and were not able to change their perspective. Thus, the past was seen in black and white, and through many simplifications and even myths, Eastern powers strengthened links with Czechoslovakia and prevented its deflection to the West. That's why I, and as well as the other young people, hadn't known from official sources anything about multicultural past of Brno. I didn't know that Czechs, Germans and Jews lived in Brno side by side for centuries, and their rivalries, sometimes friendly and sometimes not, helped build and shape the city into what was at the time of the Habsburg monarchy called the Austrian Manchester. In the 18th and 19th century, Brno was famous for producing high-quality fabrics that was distributed across the world, and some of them were reportedly used to make dresses for the British Queen. It was primarily German and Jewish businessmen who, besides less numerous Czech entrepreneurs, contributed to the great development of the industrial center of Moravia. Thanks to them, we can be proud of buildings such as the UNESCO heritage site Villa Tugendhat, beautiful Catholic and Evangelical churches, and notable buildings built for public cultural purposes. However, all these fruits of German and Jewish presence in our city, as well as all over Moravia and Bohemia, was nearly forgotten. Of course, there were historians and intellectuals who found inconsistencies unbearable and decided to not remain silent. But the Czech Patriotic Society labeled them as traitors of the Czech nation, and they were vilified in the media. This happened to writers such as Jan Mlynárik and Otto Filip, who were the first to reveal data about Czech post-war trespasses, such as violent displacement, or more accurately, expulsion of German citizens out of Czechoslovakia. Václav Havel, our former president and playwright, experienced this unpleasant reaction as well after his visit to Germany in the early 90s, when he informally apologized for brutalities which happened in many places in our country during while expulsion, and which affected usually the most vulnerable part of society: children, women, and old people. He condemned the collective guilt which was cast on more than 3 million Germans who lived in Czechoslovakia until 1945. But let's move on to my personal story. When I was a university student of the age of 21, I moved into the city district that all decent Brno citizens still avoid. There were cheap housing there, but on the other hand, it was dangerous. Mainly Roma and Vietnamese lived there, and the place was infamous for a concentration of dirty gambling clubs and drug dealing. What I wondered was why the district located immediately next to the city center is in such a disastrous state. Why are beautiful neoclassical houses let to fall when no one repaired them? And why is an appealing facade of one of them still visible with German inscription Mährische Glas- und Spiegelindustrie? That inconsistency led me to dwell on the history of this district, and I found out that this place had the same fate as the Sudetenland: the displacement of original inhabitants, the theft of their possessions, and several changes of owners. During that investigation, I also encountered witnesses who share with me their memories of the war and post-war years in a very different light than I knew from my studies. One witness told me the story of a 21-year-old girl, Gerta, who was born into a Czech-German family living in this district, but who was expelled with her 6-month-old baby in May 1945 in the so-called Brno-centre. Furthermore, I also first learned of the existence of a mass grave 30 kilometers away from my home, where about 1,000 victims of this tragic event were buried. And that finding really shocked me, mainly because it was possible to conceal such a horrific event for almost 50 years until the fall of communism. And then, of course, because at that time I was of the same age as Gerta. Her destiny, which she suffered because of her nationality, touched me not only as an issue of unjust and cruel disregard for human rights, but, I confess, also as my issue of my womanhood. So what did a woman like Gerta experience? Let's take a closer look at her story. At the beginning of the war, she was 15 years old. By the end of the war, she was a single mother with a half-year-old baby. And one night, a month after the liberation, she was hauled out of her apartment, dragged 30 kilometers away via the distant Austrian border, and repeatedly raped. She saw guards from the ranks of Czech patriotic workers tear a child from another mother's arms and, like a balloon, throw him into the field. She saw guards shoot an old couple because they couldn't go on. She experienced an epidemic of dysentery in the camp where 20,000 expellees were allowed to stay overnight. More than 1,700 people died there, and they were buried without identification in a mass grave near the town Pohořelice or along the road. However, Gerta was lucky. She was selected for agriculture work because at the end of the summer of 1945 in the villages of which the German population was expelled was lack of manpower. She worked all day just for food for her and her baby, and she remained a slave until 1951 when she finally acquired Czechoslovak citizenship. Even then, however, her situation didn't improve much. With German origins, she lived as a second-category person on the fringes of society. Although she didn't lose her homeland, her life was bitter and full of hardships. My novel tells the story of Gerta, her daughter Barbara, and the gap that appeared between them because the mother didn't want to pass on her daughter the stigma of her German roots. She kept silent about their origins and the injustice that happened to her, but it led only to misunderstandings. The first and second generation of people affected by the expulsion were mostly very alienated from one another. And the third post-war generation was able to look back at it even differently. In my book, I recorded this point of view as well. The novel ends with an attempt of a Czech student group called Youth for Intercultural Understanding to encourage the Brno City Council to apologize to the victims of the Brno Death March. This happened in the year 2000, however, their challenge failed at that time. It took next 15 years and cost a lot of effort by historians and cultural representatives before Czech society was ready to face the errors of its past. In 2015, however, it eventually happened thanks to the new city government and Mayor Petr, who decided to declare the official apology despite the threat of unpopularity of such a gesture. Thus, last year we commemorated as the Year of Reconciliation and reminded the anniversary of the expulsion by pilgrimage of reconciliation. By its end, the authorities, as you already heard, Brno Bishop and Mayor, said, "We are very sorry." And for me, and I'm pretty sure that also for thousands of people who gathered there that day, it was the most touching moment of the year. And this reality rewrote my novel, the end of my novel, as I never expected before. That moment strongly united us organizers and strengthened our conviction that it makes sense to engage for the true redressing of grievance, forgiveness, and reconciliation. We came to the conclusion that even though it was painful, the opening of discussion about our own trespasses helps the Czech society to grow up and, as we hope, to take more informed and responsible attitudes in the future. And consequently, we decided to continue in our work, inspired by your Festival of Friendship. We have created a platform of Meeting Brno, where we can meet, discuss, and through a variety of art performances engage in serious topics. In conclusion, let me please also introduce the rest of my colleagues who are not here with us on the stage, but who are present in the auditorium. First, it is Jaroslav Ostrčilik, who has been organizing the Pilgrimage of Reconciliation for 10 years. Next, it is Jiří Motl, who is a magician amongst producers. And then we have two important guys who are in the city council level, who is Matěj Holan, who is mayor deputy of mayor for cultural issues. And we have Mr. Mojmír Jeřábek, who helps us very much with international relationships. And here on the stage you have Petr Kalousek, who is an initiator of the idea, the Year of Reconciliation, and who will speak later. And also David Macek, who joined us because he is a great supporter of Czech-German relationships and who came up with a really interesting idea to invite people with roots in Bohemia or Moravia, people who annually met during Sudetendeutsche Tage, to invite them back on the ground of their former country and celebrate the Sudetendeutsche Tage in Czech Republic, the best in Brno. And who also noticed us about this wonderful festival, and he is our greatest connection with this festival. So, all of us constitute the body of the Meeting Brno Festival. All of us strive in accordance with our conscience to activate the Czech society to think deeper about important social issues. Because we all bear in mind that was once declared by the already mentioned Václav Havel, namely that indifference to others and indifference to the fate of the whole is precisely what opens the door to evil. And we all want to help keep that door closed as long as possible. Thank you for your attention.
Grazie.
Thank you, Kateřina. I want to thank Kateřina, and I'll give you my personal view. When I started reading her novel, the first pages were very tough, very heavy, as in they were very full of pain. So the whole story was somewhat dark at the beginning, and I had to go on reading the novel, and then I met Kateřina last night, and I had to read the whole novel and to meet Kateřina to realize that from that darkness, from that suffering, then hope prevailed. Hope prevailed for life and for the world. So when you get interested in other people's life, evil comes from the indifference to others, as Havel said, and the opposite is true. And this is what I personally felt. So from the dark, from the suffering, that was the beginning of Goethe's story. Then I realized that getting interested in others and getting involved in other people's destiny, as in you are good for me, can generate a possibility for the good. So thank you very much, Kateřina. Now, maybe you have seen that on the screen you could see the images of the pilgrimage of reconciliation before. And at the same time, there were the images of Brno meeting with all the colors. You saw that the meeting Brno is just like the meeting of Rimini. Maybe it's a bit smaller. Those are their colors. The idea, their idea, is the same as the one we have here in Rimini at the meeting, not just to make speeches, but to have witnesses, to promote debates, to talk about art, literature. They have a wonderful art at their meeting because they are really very, very sensitive to art. So maybe you have seen that meeting Brno is just like the Rimini meeting. So I received these images just a few days before the beginning of the meeting Brno. David sent me an email. I didn't know him. David sent me an email, and he was telling me about this meeting Brno. Then he started sending me the brochures, all the materials, and to me, that was incredible. I couldn't believe that there was something of this kind. And in their brochure, they said that they drew inspiration from the meeting of Rimini, not because it's a credit, but because to me it was incredible, it was extraordinary that they knew us. So I immediately replied to David, and then we met. David came to Milan, and we established a relationship. And I told him, just take all your friends to the meeting in Rimini, and here they are. And now I want to ask David to tell us how you lived this meeting with us. David is a sociologist, a politician, and he is a founder of an investment group supporting Meet in Brno and other initiatives. He is one of the co-organizers and soul of the Meet in Brno. Since 2004, he is member of the Regional Council of South Moravia. He is a visiting professor at John Paul II Vatican Institute. Now he is fully involved in the Meet in Brno, and I'm going to ask him to tell us about you, about your experience, and about the Meet in Brno.
Grazie.
Thank you very much, Emilia. First of all, I would like to thank Thank you very much, Emilia, for this invitation. Thank you very much for this wonderful opportunity of having me here and of having my friends with me here in Rimini. It is beautiful to promote meetings. It is important to meet the others. And it is true that everything starts off a meeting. I didn't realize that until the beginning of my studies at John Paul II Institute in 2001, when for the first time I realized that meeting others is an important value in life. I want to give my greetings to Binasco, who is a professor at this institute. Thank you for being here. He can speak Czech, but I will continue speaking Italian in any case. I'm very happy that the Slav section of this institute will be opened this year in Brno. As Pope Francis told us at the sitting on the 7th of March 2015, everything starts off with a meeting. To me, this is a working method. In April 2015, I went to Milan for Expo, and I called Cometa, which I had heard of, and I wanted to pay them a visit. Hence this personal meeting, which led to an unexpected twinning between Oliver Twist School of Cometa and a secondary school of Brno. So there was an exchange of teachers and students this year. And for the people in Brno, it was very interesting to pay a visit to Cometa. That was unexpected. It was a beautiful experience for them. Then, coming back from Expo in Milan, mid-May, Ben Posselt, one of Ben Posselt's assistants, called me. I had met Cometa, and I had also met Roberto Formigoni, thanks to a friend of mine, Kateřina Migoni, one of the many volunteers working here at the meeting. So I met Formigoni together with 10 regional councils from Brno. That was an informal meeting lasting 2 hours. And Formigoni, during that meeting, told us about the local government that they have based on subsidiarity. So in mid-May, I came back from Lombardy after all these meetings, and the next day, one of Ben Posselt's assistants called me from Prague, inviting me for the following weekend to participate in this festival that they have in Germany. I went there, and it was a sort of a national betrayal gesture for us to go there for the Pentecost. And I wanted to make the Germans and the Czech meet personally in Brno. That was an idea that was welcomed by my friends. And this is how everything came about. So I came to the meeting in Rimini for the first time 2 years ago. But I had already many friends working here in Rimini as volunteers. And this Rimini meeting had changed their lives. There's some of them in the audience, Omja and Peppa, 2 friends from Brno. They came back from the meeting in Rimini and they were stronger. They're usually more aware when they come back. They live more happily. And 2 years ago, I came here for the first time, and that really changed my life. I really fell in love with this meeting because I was moved oftentimes while I was participating in the conferences. And I started to think, how can we have the meeting of Rimini in Brno? How can we do something similar? Then, thank God, I came back to Rimini last year. And while I was coming back from Rimini, I was approaching the Alps near Udine, and I got a phone call from Kateřina. And Kateřina invited me to participate in a meeting with the organizers of the Year of Reconciliation. So I met them, and I told them that I just didn't want to have a meeting between the Germans and the Czech. Since they had this spring march last year, I wanted to do something together. I wanted to organize some meeting that would be open to everybody, not just to the Germans and Czech. I'm surprised. I'm surprised how I could convince the people that I didn't know to replicate the experience of the meeting in Rimini. And I'm grateful for that. That happened last year. At that time, there was a specific social context. As you all know in Italy very well, last year many migrants arrived in Europe. It's true that many migrants do not want to come to our country because they prefer to go to Germany directly, but there are many politicians who instrumentalize migration, and fear among people increases. People are afraid of the unknown, of people that they do not know. And we don't have many migrants in our country, as I said. Then at some point, there was a group of 200 refugees who arrived in our country. I took the car and I went with 9 friends of mine to the border of Slovakia to see and to look at these people in the eyes. I went together with Luzak, who is here in the audience. That was a very strong experience for me because you just can imagine these people came from Aleppo, and 5 days before going to this meeting with them, I came back from Rimini, where I heard the Father Ibrahim from Aleppo speaking. After talking 5 minutes with them, I realized that these were people, these were men and women, and I immediately realized that I was not afraid of them, but that I could make friendship with them. That was a very strong experience for me. And that experience convinced me to leave my party after 19 years, because in my opinion, my party felt threatened by migrants, by the relations with refugees, with Germans, with Muslims. And with my friends, I started to organize this Meet in Brno festival, inspired by the meeting of Rimini. I wanted to let Emilia know that we wanted to organize this festival, but I was convinced by some friends of mine that we had to give her a message in a different way. And Emilia got to know about a Brno meeting when our program was ready. And that was the right way of doing that, because if you receive an email by somebody that you don't even know in a city that maybe you cannot even pronounce the name of, maybe you are not interested. But if you receive a program and if you receive something like this, then it's a totally different story. Thank you very much, Kateřina, and to my friends, because this program is very, very nice. It's really done very well, and it has given us a lot of opportunities. So we organized this festival. I take the opportunity to thank all the people who came for the first edition, like Bionigi Giannola, who is the General Director of Compagnia delle Opere. Today we're about to announce to the whole world that Compagnia delle Opere, which is now present in 18 countries, will also be present in the Czech Republic, and I'm very happy with this. We also had Wael Farouk, I facilitated the meeting on the interreligious dialogue with Farouk, and I thanked his wife with the same words that we heard yesterday pronounced by Fontolan, who said that behind a great man there is always a great woman. And so I thanked Mina, who came with Wael, and at lunchtime they told me that Wael Farouk had received an invitation from me for the meeting Brno, and he said, but what is this? I don't understand. What is it? So I'm not going. And Mina, and I didn't know that, Mina comes from the Czech minority in Croatia, and she speaks perfect Czech. And when she heard Brno, he said, no, we have to go. We have to go there. We have to be there. So Wael Farouk came to speak about interreligious dialogue. And Bernd Posselt also came. This cannot be taken for granted, because if you invite somebody to the first edition and maybe you don't even know that person, then it's like you've been given a gift. So this is, let's say, the story of how this all began, and I wish once again to thank all of you, because now you have invited all of us to hear in this Rimini meeting, which is extraordinary and which is really very, very beautiful. Thank you very much, David. And now let's conclude with the speech given by the city of Brno. We should have had with us the mayor, Petr from the city of Brno, but due to other commitments, he cannot be here with us. But we have with us Mr. Petr Kalousek, working for the city council in Brno, and he is very, very close to this initiative of Meeting Brno. Kalousek is the author of the project, The Year of Reconciliation, to commemorate the victims. He was the promoter of the adoption of the document I mentioned beforehand that the mayor read at the end of the pilgrimage in 2015. And therefore, Kalousek speaks on behalf of the mayor of Brno. But actually, he is really a direct representative of the Meeting Brno. So I'm going to give him the floor. And I want to thank Mr. Kalousek for being part and parcel, being a member of a local administration that was able to understand the value of a gesture like this one. And he can support this initiative. I believe that the topic concerning cities during the meeting these days is a topic that is very interesting, and I think that next year we will be still talking about this topic. At a time of crisis like this one, cities, mayors, who can be involved and who can work for peace and who can become places where these activities and these people are welcomed is a big sign, is a major sign in order to build a civilization based on peace, but especially based on the fact that we have to be together. So thank you very much to the mayor of Brno and the councillor, Mr. Kalousek, for the symbolic value of your presence here. And I give you the floor in order to conclude this event.
Carissimi signore e signori, sono molto onorato di poter essere presente davanti a questa assemblea preziosa e ad un evento così importante come è Meeting Rimini. Mi permetto portarvi saluti cordiali da parte del sindaco della città di Brno, Petr. La città di Brno è qui rappresentata nella persona di vice sindaco e promotore cruciale della riconciliazione e del Meeting Brno, Matěj Holan.
The mayor is very sorry because he's not here today, but he sends you the following message.
Ladies and gentlemen, our city, which is proud of its privileged position in the center of Europe, had for centuries been a place where people of three major cultures lived side by side: the Czechs, the Germans, and the Jews. Being in Rimini now, I cannot help mentioning the influence and presence of other cultures, including Italians. However, the tragic 20th century arrived, and with only 6 years, this coexistence was swept away by the war. German occupiers chased freedom and law out of our country and destroyed the lives of thousands of Czechs, Jews, and Roma. But evil creates nothing but evil. Hence, in Brno, defenseless people, mostly women, children, and old men, fell victims of reprisal for Nazi crimes during subsequent forcible expulsion. The only sin of some of them was the fact that they spoke German. Brno lost its Jews, Roma, and Germans, who used to create the specific atmosphere of the local multicultural society. And the shadow of this tragedy is still present in the city these days. Nevertheless, it is the task of a modern city of the 21st century to jump over its shadows and reflect on the past in its complexity, however tragic and unflattering it may be. Therefore, the city leaders got inspired by some of the Brno's cultural and political figures and declared the year of 2015 as the Year of Reconciliation. The goal of the project was to commemorate the 70th anniversary of the end of the Nazi occupation and the Second World War. The authors of the project enabled today's citizens of Brno to pay homage to the memory of all the victims. Czech resistance fighters, Jews, Roma, and for the first time also to the German-speaking inhabitants of Brno. This all-year-round program, with more than 80 events, addressed a large number of citizens. Local residents reacted in different ways. Their responses ranged from positive to completely negative. However, abroad, and especially in German-speaking countries, enthusiasm prevailed. Words of respect were expressed even by the German Federal President Joachim Gauck in Berlin on 20th June 2015. He thanked Brno for its sovereign gesture and for establishing a new trust between neighbors. As said before, one of the highlights of the Year of Reconciliation 2015 was the Pilgrimage of Reconciliation, commemorating the victims of the so-called Brno Death March of 30th May 1945. The pilgrimage headed in the opposite direction than that march as a symbolic gesture of reconciliation. It started at the mass grave in Pohřelice and ended in the city center of Brno, where the Declaration of Reconciliation and Shared Future was pronounced. It became the first ever official document adopted by the General Assembly of the city of Brno, mentioning the expulsion of the Brno's German population. It declares not only sorrow over the tragedies caused by the war, but also a belief that we, having taken our lessons from history, will never allow such tragedies to happen again. Encouraged by the success of the Year of Reconciliation project, the organizers decided to continue and work with the potential further, and thus the Meeting Brno Festival came into existence. This establishes an international cultural and discussion platform with educational outreach, especially towards young people. The experience of this year's premiere has been entirely positive. We have seen the memories of the unfortunate war and post-war events being converted into an enriching dialogue. The theme of the cultural and artistic events this year was Lost and Found Homes. The preparations for the Meeting Brno 2017 are already in full swing. Our goal is to address mainly university and high school students with topical issues as migration and radicalization of the society. Let me just say here that Brno hosts more than 80,000 university students from all over the Czech Republic and a lot of other countries as well. Of the specific topics of the year 2017, let's also mention the establishment of the Documentation Center of the Holocaust of the Brno Jews, installation of panels on the Trail of Jewish Brno, or an invitation for descendants of 3 prominent industrialist families: the Tugendhats, the Löfbeers, and Šťastnys, to a meeting in Brno. It is a symbolic matter. The houses of those 3 families nowadays represent the top highlights of our city. One of them, as said before, was inscribed on the list of UNESCO World Heritage Sites. I believe that meeting Brno is a festival of extraordinary importance, and it seems to me vital to continue with the project. In 2015, we wanted to make the Year of Reconciliation into a tradition which would allow the citizens of Brno to have a better insight into the current situation in Europe. We hope that it might help them understand the refugee crisis rationally and without unnecessary hysteria. Being Brno's mayor and citizen, I was convinced that my fellow citizens would accept with understanding and recognition the fact that, in close cooperation with central institutions and security forces, the city is ready to manage the arrival of potential refugees. Unfortunately, we also noted in Brno a wave of irrational hatred towards refugees and peaceful Islam believers. That was the moment which finally convinced me that the Year of Reconciliation was just a beginning. And it was, figuratively speaking, too short. That not only Brno resistance, but also the entire Czech nation are still in need for such years of reconciliation, forgiveness, and finding inner freedom and dignity, which should express itself by paying respect to freedom and dignity of the others. I would like to make a quotation here. As a worldwide famous writer, Milan Kundera, who was born in Brno, said, "Czech always guard their borders rather than cross them." But at the same time, I would like to mention here that Czech people, not too long ago, experienced what it is like to be forced to search freedom and safety as refugees from perverse ideology of communism. I can hardly understand why this painful experience nowadays resonates so little in the hearts and minds of today's Czech in relation to migrants who are fleeing violence, horrors of war, or ideological and racial purges. That is why I see the importance of the existence of the meeting Brno Festival as a mission. A mission not only for Brno and its residents, but for Europe, for Italy, for Greece, for Germany, for all the hotspots or whatever we may call the places of human pain and suffering, but also places of solidarity and hope. This is why we wish to gather every year at the meeting Brno, so that we and you can talk, discuss, argue, and cross the boundaries of stereotype thinking. But most importantly, we should not stay silent. Let me use this precious opportunity to invite you to our beautiful city, not only on the occasion of meeting Brno 2017. Carissime signori e signori, cari amici, volevo ringraziare di nuovo.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, thank you very much once again for inviting me here. I hope that today's meeting is just the beginning of a common path and of common friendship between us as people. We are a good for all others. You are a good for me and you are a good for us. Thank you for your attention.
Grazie. Grazie.
Thank you. Thank you to the Mayor of Brno. You will bring him our regards. Thank you, Kalousek. I think that Kalousek's speech, the mayor's speech, sorry, that was read by Kalousek, is further confirms that friendship among peoples is possible. The attention that we have heard, even if dramatic, to the refugees, to the people who are suffering today under different circumstances, but they still have the same suffering, and oftentimes the root of that suffering is the same. So in attention to that, in attention to refugees, the fact that we've been able to meet here and that we have now a new friendship, that tells us that friendship is possible, because we are certain that you are a good for me, and this friendship can lead to a shared life and a shared history. So thank you very much, because the fact of having you here with us today is a further confirmation that this is all possible. I invite you all to participate in the fundraising campaign for this meeting. We always reiterate that on every occasion, because we have to support the meeting if we want to continue having the meeting. So thank you for your contribution. Thank you very much for being with us. Enjoy your lunch, because it's time for lunch.